So there are certain points in our life where we have these core memories, just moments in our life where we completely shift our meaning and understanding of the world, and more than anything ourselves. Probably it's actually ourselves first. One of those moments came when I was in part of my training that I did with the coaching room. One of the owners, Joseph, at the time I didn't know that I just wanted attention. I wanted some sort of approval from an authoritative male figure. I learned that later on, but at the time, in one of the breaks, I simply asked him, I'm like, hey, out of the books over there, which was Dr. Michael Hall's book, so the program was called, it might have been Master Prac at the time or Associate Certified Meta-Coach, the program was, and Michael Hall's book's behind me. They're basically about 10 of them down there. And at the time I said, which book do you recommend? And he goes, what are you interested in? And I go, well, I'm interested in all of it. I was deep in the learning at this point, and I really was genuinely interested in all of it. And he goes, well, what did you last read? And I said, I last read A Brief History of Everything, which is this little guy here by Ken Wilber. And he goes, right. And what did Ken say in that book? And I thought for a minute, I go, well, what I got from it was, and he goes, I'm just going to stop you there. I didn't ask you what you got from it. I asked you what was Ken saying in the book. And I kind of was stuck. And I'm like, I guess what I interpreted, he goes, just stop again. I'm not asking what you interpreted. I'm asking you, what did Ken say in the book? What was he saying? And I'm completely a deer in headlights at this point. And I was paused and I was kind of looking at him. There was a guy with me as well. And he was like, fuck, how do I dissolve into the ground? And he looks at me and goes, if you can't answer that question, then it may be worth going back to that book and rereading it. I said, okay. And he goes, do you know the story about Alice in Wonderland and the Cheshire Cat? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, when Alice asked the Cheshire Cat, where should I go? And the Cheshire Cat goes, well, where do you want to go? And she says, I don't really mind where I go. And the cat goes, well, it doesn't matter which road you take then, does it? And I'm like, okay. And he goes, do you get it? And I'm like, yeah, I'm the cat. And he goes, great to see you. And just stared straight through any fabrication of a personality structure that I attempted to put in front of him at the time, straight to my soul. And I just was like a vacuum. And for the next couple of hours, I had parts of me falling away that I didn't know exist. If you can make sense of that, I can now. I didn't at the time. And that was probably one of the most prolific moments throughout all my training with the coach room, and I've done extensive training through them. They're fantastic. However, what I came to learn was a couple of things. One of those things was that we developed through stages. Now, I understood at the time that we developed through stages when it came to movement and training and so forth, and I've already spoken to that in other videos. What I also came to really deeply learn is that we develop through stages vertically in a developmental sense as well. And Wilber, who I have read a large amount, studied a large amount of his work, and the coach room do a lot of work through Wilber's work and through Integral Coaching Canada as well. But they've done a fantastic job of integrating that into a phenomenal body of work. So with that in mind, the stages that I was unaware of have become an extensive part of not just my body of work, but how I understand myself and how I communicate to other people, because the way that I communicate to people at a particular stage is going to be different based upon other stages. And what I've come to learn is that from a coaching lens is that you have to talk to their stage. And you have to be able to learn how to assess their stage. And this isn't a good or bad or better or worse or higher or lower. You think of it like an earlier stage and a later stage. Think of it like school. There's just earlier stages, later stages, but all are necessary. And think of it like school, that you can just kind of stop at any point in time and stay at that stage. And that's completely okay. In fact, in Wilber's words, a completely inclusive society is acceptable of, or is accepting of every single person at all stages. So that is the integrative acceptive approach, which is really interesting. But I'm going to draw out the stages today for you. I'm going to give you a couple of principles and some protocols you can use and ways that you can assess where you're at and maybe where other people are at as well. And this will be massively beneficial to understand, like in relationships, in understanding yourself and so forth. So there's a second part of that story actually I'm going to touch on quickly first. And the second part of that story was later on I went up to Joseph and was in a break, and I was waiting, and I kind of eyes were welling up, but I was waiting. And he knew I was waiting. He was talking to someone. And as soon as he finished talking, he turned to me. I just started talking at him. And I said to him, when I was younger, I grew up in a household with alcoholism and domestic violence. And it was with my mother and her partner. I wasn't a stepfather per se, but it was that type of figure. And I was saying to him, as a 10, 11-year-old boy, I couldn't heal her pain, but I could make her laugh. And so what I learned to do in certain situations was to use humor to help her feel better. It was this over-responsibility me. I didn't know it was there at the time. And so in certain circumstances, such as the one that I was with him, there was this tension, and my way to diffuse that tension was to attempt to use humor. He saw straight through that and straight through my soul. And as I'm telling this, my eyes are like completely, I'm crying, right? Not sobbing, just crying. And he goes, I too grew up in a house similar to that. And then he looks at me and he goes, it's great to see you. And it's so profoundly interesting how those two, the same sentence in different contexts can mean so much different. I mean, if you understand what I'm saying, it's just so different. And it wasn't, once again, that I was attempting to get his approval. He was holding space for me to understand something of myself. And I'm fortunate enough, I probably was 28 at the time, that I kind of walked down that path and allowed myself to be vulnerable to myself to understand that. And vulnerability is a sign of strength. It's not a sign of weakness. So that is something that I would offer many times over. So anyway, many more stories like that. But let's get stuck into this. I've got a pen. So I've got the Boss Fit Matrix that I've developed, and what I do is I help people understand where they're at vertically in the areas of movement, mindset, nutrition, and I call it time or method. So move, mind, mouth method, or body, self, food, and time, which is my brand, Boss Fit, BSFT. And I remember early on I had a different mentor, and she asked me, well, how do you know when people get there? And I was like, I have no idea how we can measure the way that people think. Is it better? Is it gooder? And so forth. What I didn't know is that there are many different frameworks and models that can measure it quite well. Now, it's always going to be near reality models like personality type indicators and things like that, but they can be exceptionally useful in the same way that when you use Google Maps or any other maps, they're very useful, but they're not the actual territory. They're not the actual ground that you're walking on, right? So really important distinction. On top of that, what I came to learn was that, and what I put into these stages is that we have 3 core stages, 1 pre-stage. Now what's really interesting, and I'm going to do a different video on a lot of Wilber's work and how these stages work, because they map across his stages. And not just his stages, by the way. Ken Wilber mapped it across, 80 to 100 other, from psychologists to anthropologists, the different vertical models that he looked at, from values to cognitive lines of development through to Maslow's hierarchies, and being able to see this vertical development across these maps. So his sort of map across that. That's for another video. But what I came to learn was that there's what's known as a black and white stage. And this black and white stage is usually an all or nothing stage. And an all or nothing stage usually equals a whole lot of nothing, because 100 times 0 will usually equal 0. And we're going to call this stage here stuck. And so this is a predominant worldview for an individual. They're kind of stuck. Another way to think of it when it comes to nutrition, I talk about it, but it's called swing. Or start-stop. There are other names for different stages in different pillars. But here it's about getting stuck. And you hear it in someone's language and they're like, well, that's just the way I am. Or take it or leave it. It's this black and white, just like it's my way or the highway. There's no flexibility. This is who I've always been. When I came out of the womb, this was me. Like it's that type of thinking when it comes to someone's frame of mind, or the real way to say it is their egoic structures, their personality structures, the way that they've structured their thinking, the way that they value their values, the way they believe their beliefs, is that they're stuck with that. Now, what's really interesting, and we look at this on let's call it a psycho-spiritual level, so we're integrating both the psychology components, or the psychological components, and then we look at the spiritual components, which is the essence of a human being. And this is different bodies of work for this, but we're going to look at this higher up this stage here. At a later stage, you are better at being the observer. You don't identify as your thoughts, you observe your thoughts, you can hold multiple perspectives and so forth. Down here, you're identifying far more with what we're going to call the occupant. Hopefully I spelled that right. The occupant. I did not. Occupant. Doesn't matter. Either way, the occupant. And so from here, the more that we are identified with the occupant, the more that we're identifying with our thoughts and our structures and our personality. Keep in mind the word personality, the word persona, is actually derived from the Greek word, which means the mask we wear at the drama, the mask we wear at the play. And so your persona is something that we've learned and developed to be able to learn how to engage with the world around us, to be able to achieve safety, approval, importance, love, whatever the case might be. However, as we move through these stages, just like I mentioned with school, or maybe another way you could think about it is like karate belts, the more that we're able to observe these things as opposed to being had by our thoughts. We have thoughts rather than being had by them. And so the first thing here is we start to see people take on a stage called student. And they go from being, well, this is just who I am, to start thinking like, well, maybe there's a different way. And so they start to be a little bit more open. Down here, so this is another model called the ORC model, open, reserved, closed. Someone up here is usually more open. Someone down here is usually more closed. And for us to make any sort of developmental stages and growth, we have to become open to learning. And so if somebody is stuck, they're usually closed off to any other type of thinking. It works for them, so why would they change it, even if it doesn't work for them? And so for us to be able to move forward, we need to start to be open. And so a student first becomes a student. Now this individual here, when they first comes online, they might start thinking about different types of religions or community groups. It could be spiritual groups. There's usually some sort of communal community of sorts, and then some sort of principles and lessons, or a Bible of sorts, whether the Bible could be with sport or, the 12-step program of AAs. It doesn't matter too much, but there's some form of community and some form of faith is usually how it works. There's usually a group. So the person becomes a student, they start learning from other people, but starting to become more than anything a student of themselves. The next stage here is called scholar. At this point here, the person's really starting to develop. They're starting to really understand whether it's religion or not. And they're sort of moving through that. But they're a scholar in the sense that they've gone down this pathway for a number of years and a number of experiences and a number of practices, right? Because there's a big difference between 10 years experience and 1 year experience 10 times. You can get really good at kindergarten, you can be in a phenomenal white belt, or you continue to move through these stages where you're constantly in an uncomfortable position and you're stretching yourself. So if you're feeling like an imposter, then usually you're on the right path of growth and development. And so this scholar here is that they're starting to really know about and relate with a lot of the work that they're learning. They're starting to understand themselves on a larger level now. What's really interesting when we start looking at self-awareness is people sometimes confuse self-awareness with persona awareness. And so commonly someone's gone, I'm pretty self-aware, and then they go and refer to things which is their personality. Self-awareness is to be able to see your personality as things that you do as opposed to who you actually are. And that's the phenomenal capacity to be the observer as opposed to being had by or being the occupant, right? After scholar, we start to move to sage. Now sage becomes wise. It's the integration of continual experiences. The only way we can get through here is lots of failed attempts, whether it be learning, whether it be understanding of self, whether it be literally just years and years and reps of conversations, journaling, meditation, different types of bodies of work and so forth. So you can imagine as this goes through, it opens up phenomenally. And look at Wilber's work, and you look at Maslow's work, and you look at Robert Keegan's work, you look at Lovinger's work, Graves's work. All of these individuals have this process where you transcend and include these. So it's not like you tick the box and you go to the next one, tick the box and you go to the next one. The sage is still the student, very much so. And so our capacity to basically, it's called transcend and include, is extremely important for our vertical growth and development. There's later stages up here. I'm not going to get into that at all because this is just meant to be a simple model mapped across my boss fit matrix. But the key thing here is our ability to learn and move through these stages is fundamentally hinges on two things. One is love, the other is education. Now, love can be seen as a couple of different things. It can be seen as love of the greater. It can be love of the lower, and lower meaning like an earlier version of you, compassion, aspiration. More than anything, when I talk about love, I'm talking about holding space, and I'm talking about self-acceptance. So much of self-love is actually just self-acceptance. When I'm talking about education, I'm talking about continual feedback. Now, in order to get feedback, you need to have feed forward. And feedback doesn't mean that someone's opinion of what you're doing is right and wrong, and you need to take that feedback on. Feedback is just simply being able to take any feedback and assess that feedback, hold that perspective while simultaneously holding your own perspective. So the way that we move through this as well, and I think a really important part, and I didn't put it there, but some form of community. Because that community allows you to have some capacity to learn and grow and develop and have a shared language and shared experiences. So that's the pillar of mind or of self, and it's about understanding self and other. And that's part of the BossFit Matrix. There's a couple of other, like I mentioned before, models, but that's the model we have for mind and how we assess people moving through. Now, I'll talk about the different types of assessments you can take later in the video. I'm just going to rub this off. I'm going to talk through some principles and some protocols for you. Let's write principles up here for you. Principle number 1, you are not your thoughts. You have thoughts. You are not your thoughts. And this is an exceptionally really important point, because I had a client the other day, I was talking to him about it, and I'm like, the common mistake people make when it comes to meditation is that they try and quiet their mind. That's not the goal. The goal, if there was to be a goal with meditation, your focus is to observe your mind. That's it. Just to move into the observer. And so in order to do that, you start understanding that you're not your thoughts. You have thoughts. If you can see something, if you can think something, if you can feel something, if you can taste something, you are not it. To say you are your thoughts is the same as like saying that you are what you eat, which obviously isn't all the same. But if you put saying you are that, you are not that. You can taste that. You can think that. You are not it, and you are not your body. And so you have a body, you have thoughts. The first principle there is moving from this idea that you are your thoughts to that you have thoughts and you observe them. It's influenced by so many different things. But it's like watching the clouds and saying you are a cloud. You have clouds. Number 2 is the map is not the territory. So map is not territory. I know that's a time symbol, but you get it. The map is not the territory. I used the example before. When you're looking at Google Maps, they can be exceptionally detailed and exceptionally similar, but it's not the actual territory. And so the way that this is an NLP presupposition, by the way that we recreate or represent reality to ourselves is filtered through so many different thoughts, beliefs, structures, and perceptual filters. And so when we look at something that's occurring, we're not actually looking at reality, we're looking at our version of reality. And when we can really grasp that, we start to see that we are splintered in the most beautiful way. And so first principle, once again, you're not your thoughts. Second is the map is not the territory. Your perception of reality is a perception of it. It is not it. It might be a sincere version of it, but it's not actually it. The next one is that you're right and you're also incomplete. Now this is really important because, and it's one of Wilber's, and it's speaking to the stages, is that from that stage and that point of view, from that map, you're right. There's also all these other things that you may be missing. And so it's so powerful to be able to go through and go, what am I missing here? When looking at a certain situation or scenario, or if you've got a conflict with your partner or something at work that's not working in business or whatever the case might be, what am I missing? That's a powerful question, and if you ask it wanting to know the answer, you'll fundamentally fast track your development and your growth. So you're right and incomplete. Number 4 is that development is a process. And this is really important because there's no finish line. You don't actually arrive. You understanding that development is simply this continual unfolding means that you're not meant to be anywhere. This is exactly where you're meant. The universe didn't get it wrong. You're just at where you're at. And that's a really important realization to come to, is that you're at where you're at, and to be able to accept that means that you will absolutely continue to build momentum towards what's ultimately for you, but for what's important to you. So remember that your development it's not a certificate. You don't have an arrival. There's reference points for sure. There's goals for sure. But development is a process. Number 5, can I squeeze it in here? Let's see if I can. I'm going to do that. See, I can squeeze it in there. Number 5. Good, cool. All right, positive intention. Every single behavior has a positive intention. Now, this might sound silly, and we might have examples throughout history. Let's just keep it really simple here. If you have a behavior that is getting a negative outcome, that doesn't mean it doesn't have a positive intention. You maybe learnt that behavior or that way of thinking when you were much younger, and back in the day, it did serve you to get a positive intention. And you might have to dig through your subconscious a bit to really unpack why you might be doing that and where you may have benefited from in the past. But no change will occur, because it's not change we're after, it's self-understanding. No change will occur until you learn what a positive intention is behind a particular behavior that you're ready to grow past. So really important, you're not your thoughts, map is not the territory, you're right and incomplete, development is a process. I'll write it over here. And then number 5, every behavior has a positive intention. Should we talk through some protocols? So those principles are really important. It allows us to have some frames of reference in mind to govern our direction with change. And I offer principles and I offer protocols with all of my work to make sure that people have something to at least try on and move forward with. So let's have a look here. Protocols. Excuse the dumping of weights in the background. I literally am upstairs in my office at the gym. Right. So first things first, we want to assess. Now, there's many different models you can use to assess, and there's many different frameworks you can use to assess. The ones that I'm going to recommend is one's called, this is the Rahidi, which stands for Riso Hudson Enneagram Type Indicator. It's an Enneagram test. The Enneagram is a psychospiritual model, and some people struggle with it because it doesn't box you in. It helps to unbox you because it has these like 9 core types, and then it has 9 levels of healthiness. And what that means is that the same individual that has a particular personality structure, depending on their levels of healthiness or stress and security. So security and stress, they will show up slightly different. And it's a really, really beautiful model. I really like it. It's something that I've studied and read a lot on. And you can do that test. It takes like 45 minutes. There's the free ones out there, but this one's $20, I think, maybe US. But the print off, like as in the results you get, are phenomenal. It's a great place to start. It's a great model to use as well. So Rahidi. The next one here is you can do the Boss Fit Matrix test. It's a 3-minute test that I have. It's just super high level, and it'll help give you an indication of where you are in the areas of body, self, food, and time through those 3 core stages. It's a really simple test. I'll put it in the comments for you. You can do it, it's free. But the key thing, once again, is that we're just assessing where we are so we know what to do as for the next steps. After that, you can do what's called a native perspective. Now, there's a test that I have. It's got 8 questions. And your native perspective is to do with actually Ken Wilber's quadrants, his body of work. I have done other videos on that. I'm going to do more videos on that. But the native perspective basically means that between a first person, a second, a third, and a fourth person perspective, which, by the way, kind of works through those stages. Your first is stuck. Your second is student. Your third is scholar. And your fourth is sage. You actually move through those stages. That's why there's need to be more videos for it. But either way, you can do a native perspective. It gives you 8 questions and multiple choice, and your questions, your answers will lead to an idea of where your dominant perspective is. Now, this is super important. Yes, we're looking after a native perspective. What we're also looking for is, what are you fucking missing? Where's your blind spots here? So your Rahidi, your Boss Fit Matrix, your native perspective, we're starting to get a really good all-round assessment of where you're at. There's one more. It's called the Identity Compass. Now, this is a different test. This test itself is it. When I order one for my client, it's $250, and you can only do it through a facilitator. But your Identity Compass actually measures the value, as in how much you care behind particular patterns of thinking. It's a profound test, and everyone in my community does it. In the Peak community, every client that I work with does it. Every corporate client that I work with does it, and we use it. It's almost like getting your blood results back and having a doctor interpret it for you. Your identity compass gives you clear data on where your drivers are and where your blind spots are, and ultimately what's holding you back. So that's one, assess. Two, more than anything, as far as an actual what to do next, we always start with an awareness practice. And so your goal from here is to actually just bring awareness to a certain change that you want to make, a certain pattern of thinking, just understanding of like, hey, well, where am I being shut off? Where do I feel friction? When do I create certain arguments where there doesn't need to be one? Like starting to bring real awareness to what's the problem here. There's a symptom occurring. What's that symptom? Where could I be benefiting from that? Because what you're after there is like, what's my positive intention? What am I trying to get out of this particular, that's an N, this particular behavior or this particular way of thinking? If there were to be a positive intention, what could it be? Even asking tentatively, and you might find there might be a result that comes up. But keep digging away with the belief that there is a positive intention, because as soon as you start to uncover it and you're like, oh fuck, that's actually it, right? An example could be someone might go cold whenever they have an argument with their partner, and never ends up well for the relationship. And the person might know this. They're like, I actually don't want to do that, but I just go cold on them. I don't even know why I do it, which is a lazy response, by the way. It's I haven't asked myself the right questions with the right desire to be able to find out why I do it. Because when we find out why, you kind of dissolve the problem. And so one's capacity to go, well, where have this potentially served me in the past? They're like, my parents would always give me the cold shoulder until I watched my mum do it, until my dad would come and, be nice again and speak to her. And so I'm just waiting for my partner to come and do that to me, but it never works out. But when I did it, my dad would always come and apologize, even if I was the one in the wrong. So you start to see these dynamics, these childhood patterns come out later on. It's just like, so your goal here is connection. Are you getting that? Fuck no, I'm not getting that. It's like, great. So what are other choices that come up for you then? So this is a way you can look at going, where am I at? And what's an awareness practice? And then what's something that I'm wanting to grow past? And what's my positive intention behind it? So team, that's the stages of self or mind within the BossFit Matrix. It's a really, really beautiful model, especially when we start getting stuck into Wilber's work. This video went for a bit longer than I thought it was, but hopefully you managed to get something from it that's useful for you. A couple of key things I want to leave you with. There's no finish line. You're not meant to be anywhere. You're exactly where you're meant to be. I mean, if you're watching this video, then you're usually interested in this stuff. And so you're probably seeking something that you already have. It's just learning how to uncover it. And your capacity to do that is heavily based upon the questions that you're asking yourself and how willing or open you are to seeing the responses that arise without defensiveness. So this work is for the seekers. And if that's you, not to just plug it, but you probably would suit my peak community. If you're interested, I run info sessions on it. Otherwise, there's a bunch of other free resources and other things you can get all this type of information plus more from. But that's me done. I'm out. Until next time, peace and pizza. I'll see you soon.